Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Our top story: President Trump and Chinese Communist leader Xi Jinping are set to discuss trade tensions after Trump accused China of violating a tariff truce. U.S. lawmakers accusing China of exploiting student visas to spy on American soil. Tech restrictions and visa revocations are fueling tensions with trust and trade on the line. A Chinese student is facing a felony charge for illegally voting in the 2024 U.S. election despite not being a U.S. citizen. He has now fled the country and returned to China. We'll zoom in on the case. And Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth is sounding the alarm, calling China a serious and rising threat in the Indo-Pacific. He delivered the warning at a global security forum in Singapore.
It has to be clear to all that Beijing is credibly preparing to potentially use military force to alter the balance of power in the Indo-Pacific. We know. It's public.
A high-stakes call between President Trump and Chinese Communist leader Xi Jinping could happen this week. White House officials signaled the move over the weekend as tensions between the U.S. and China continue to rise. Last Friday, Trump accused China of totally violating their trade deal, though he didn't get into specifics. Officials are pointing to China restricting exports of critical rare earth minerals, a move that may breach their trade truce agreement. On top of that, Trump announced he'll double tariffs on steel and aluminum, a move to protect U.S. industries and push back on what he calls unfair trade. White House National Economic Council Director Kevin Hassett weighed in. Let's take a listen.
That conversation with President Xi actually has been scheduled. When is it going to take place?
I'm not sure if it's been scheduled at a specific date, but it has been discussed that the two of them will talk about the Geneva Agreement. It's something that the presidents want to talk about this week.
So it is going to happen this week, though? You're sure of that?
I'm not sure, George, because you never know in international relations, but my expectation is that both sides have expressed a willingness to talk.
The U.S. and China are currently in the middle of a 90-day tariff reprieve, but new U.S. tariffs on steel and aluminum are now set to take effect on June 4th. At the same time, China has been tightening exports of critical rare earth minerals, essential for the U.S. energy and automobile industries. Because of this, some U.S. officials say it's time to rethink their trade relationship. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent shared his thoughts on where U.S.-China relations are headed on CBS's Face the Nation.
We do not want to decouple, Margaret, but we do need to de-risk, as we saw during COVID, whether it was with semiconductors, medicines, the other products. We are in the process of de-risking.
No official date is set yet for a call between President Trump and Chinese Communist leader Xi Jinping, but with tensions rising, both sides seem to be gearing up for a crucial conversation. The Chinese regime is lashing out at Washington over actions it says have harmed Chinese interests, from new tech restrictions to visa cancellations. While Beijing insists it is honoring a recent trade truce, the U.S. is accusing Beijing of using students for espionage. Here's more.
Congressman John Molinar, who chairs the House Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party, says the moves are a response to growing concerns about CCP spies on U.S. campuses. He says the Chinese regime pressures students from China to participate in these activities. The State Department says scrutiny of Chinese nationals in the U.S. is increasing and that many student groups operate under Chinese consulate direction.
A Chinese national charged with illegal voting in the 2024 U.S. election has fled the country despite a court order barring his departure. Hao Xianggao was a student at the University of Michigan. Officials say he lied on voter registration forms last October and successfully cast a ballot in the 2024 election.
He established residency in Ann Arbor, Michigan by using a student ID and other documents while also signing a document claiming to have U.S. citizenship. The student surrendered his Chinese passport in November and was told not to leave Michigan. But the FBI says he traveled to China from Detroit in January on another passport. An arrest warrant was issued in April after he failed to appear at 2 court hearings in Ann Arbor. He was facing charges of perjury and attempting to vote as an unauthorized elector, a felony. He now faces a federal charge, though the United States does not have an extradition treaty with China.
The FBI says Gao boarded a flight to China using a Chinese passport. This passport has a different serial number than the one he previously surrendered to U.S. authorities. For more immigration news, federal agents raided an alleged underground nightclub in Southern California. They arrested 36 Chinese and Taiwanese nationals charged with being in the U.S. unlawfully. Here's more.
The operation was led by Homeland Security Investigations and ICE's Enforcement and Removal Operations. It was part of a financial crimes task force effort. Video posted online shows nighttime footage of the raid, followed by a large group of detainees seated on a sidewalk in daylight before being taken into custody. Authorities have not released the name or exact location of the club.
Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth says Washington will strengthen its overseas defenses to counter China's growing threats, especially over Taiwan. NTD's Daniel Monahan brings us highlights from the Shangri-La Dialogue Global Security Conference in Singapore.
Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth says the U.S. is increasing security in the Western Hemisphere, taking back the Panama Canal from what he described as the malign Chinese influence.
China did not build that canal. We did. And we will not allow China to weaponize it or control it.
Hegseth called China's behavior towards its neighbors in the world an urgent wake-up call.
President Trump has also said that Communist China will not invade Taiwan on his watch. So our goal is to prevent war, to make the cost too high, and peace the only option.
The defense secretary says the U.S. does not seek conflict with the communist nation.
But we will not be pushed out of this critical region. And we will not let our allies and partners be subordinated and intimidated through its massive military buildup and growing willingness to use military force to achieve its goals, including gray zone tactics and hybrid warfare. China has demonstrated that it wants to fundamentally alter the region's status quo.
China protested against Hegseth, calling it a threat. It accused him of ignoring the call for peace from regional countries and of advocating a Cold War mentality. Australia is also sounding the alarm on Communist China's actions.
What we have seen from China is the single biggest increase in military capability and build-up in a conventional sense by any country since the end of the Second World War.
Australian Defence Minister Richard Marles says Australia wants to see strategic transparency and reassurance provided by China.
And an understanding of why it is needed to have such an extraordinary military build-up that China is engaging in.
How are you doing? How are you?
Hegseth has urged Australia to substantially boost its defence spending to 3.5% of its GDP as soon as possible, saying the investment would help maintain peace through strength in the Indo-Pacific. The Philippines says you only need to look at how China treats their much smaller neighbors to envision a China-led international order.
What the Chinese government considers fair and just may stand in stark contrast to the norms and values accepted by the rest of the world.
Meanwhile, Lithuania says the United States' strategic focus on the Indo-Pacific is both justified and necessary, but not America's responsibility alone.
And the convergence of Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea into an increasingly coordinated authoritarian axis, let's put it diplomatically, demands an equally unified response by us.
And the Dutch are warning that Chinese cyber espionage targeting the Netherlands is intensifying. The Dutch defense minister said Saturday that the Chinese Communist Party is especially focused on stealing advanced semiconductor technology. Daniel Monahan, NTD News.
A man from Hong Kong is fighting for his city's freedom while living in exile in Taiwan. Fu Tong and his wife were among the first Hong Kong demonstrators charged in 2020, following pro-democracy protests that began in 2019. The Beijing-controlled Hong Kong government accused them of rioting. Fu is now preparing to mark the 36th anniversary of the Tiananmen Square massacre on June 4th. Here's the story.
Fu Tong co-hosts a Hong Kong human rights exhibition in Taiwan's capital, Taipei. It showcases artwork and photos from the protest movement. He is now preparing to mark this year's anniversary of the violent response to protesters in and around Tiananmen Square in Beijing on June 4, 1989. Before dawn, Chinese tanks entered Tiananmen Square. They crushed weeks of pro-democracy demonstrations by students and workers. Taiwan is the only part of the Chinese-speaking world where June 4th can be remembered openly.
When Hong Kong can no longer hold a June 4th vigil and can no longer even mention it, Taiwan's existence becomes very important. It's one of the very few places in Asia where people can openly commemorate the June 4th incident, discuss it, and even condemn the Chinese Communist Party. The existence of such a space is hugely significant.
A national security law imposed by the Chinese Communist Party has outlawed such events in Hong Kong.
We have witnessed how our relatively free city can be completely silenced in just 5 years. Saying something anti-China or expressing views the government doesn't like can get you arrested and detained, with no idea when your trial will happen or how long you might lose your freedom for.
Fu leads tours of the Hong Kong Human Rights Exhibition in Taipei while also sharing some of his experiences from the front lines of the protests. He nevertheless feels that the message he hopes to convey is difficult to reach those still living in Hong Kong. But Fu's story resonated with some Taiwanese visitors who fear the island may head down a similar path as cross-strait tensions continue to escalate.
Freedom and democracy do not come easily. While listening to the tour just now, the guide choked up several times. I just think it's incredibly suffocating to see a once free and democratic place turn into what it is now. I really hope this will never happen to Taiwan.
We are well aware of what the Chinese Communist Party wants to do to us. Their methods may not be the same as what they did to Hong Kong. Instead, they might use cultural infiltration or gradually influence our daily lives.
Fu remains committed to advocating for Hong Kong issues and the values of freedom while living far away from home.
I really feel like I've been chosen to be in this era. If I don't step up to do things that seem foolish and unrewarding, then who will? As long as I can, I'm willing to keep going.
The Chinese Communist Party has never provided a full death toll of the Tiananmen Square massacre. Rights groups and witnesses say the figure could run into the thousands. Public discussion of what happened on June 4, 1989 is taboo in China.
Coming up this Wednesday, June 4th, join China in Focus for an exclusive look at today's U.S.-China trade relations 36 years after the Tiananmen Square massacre. Here's a preview. As world markets watch the current trade truce between the U.S. and China, talks of China opening up are cropping up again. It's a phrase with echoes in the past. What happened the last time major calls for economic reform, even government reform, rang out inside China? What took place that fateful day that is still remembered around the world but silenced inside China? Join us to see if global trade is under the shadow of 1989 only on NTD. Coming up, severe flash floods and mudslides slam southern China, leaving a trail of destruction after heavy weekend rains. U.S.-China tensions are heating up, with Texas passing a new law targeting Chinese Communist Party influence. At the same time, Beijing is reactivating a World War II airbase, expanding its military footprint in the Indo-Pacific. We've got expert analysis, that and more in just a minute here on China in Focus. Welcome back to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Turning to China, flood season is now underway in the country's south. On Monday, flash floods and mudslides struck Yunnan province. Authorities say heavy rains over the weekend triggered severe damage across the region. Let's take a closer look. According to local media, dozens of homes and buildings were destroyed. Nearly 6,000 people affected. Several major roads connecting Sino-Burmese borders collapsed amid the flooding, disrupting traffic and communications. More than 600 travelers were trapped within the local tourist attraction. Evacuation was underway. According to weather authorities, heavy rains will continue for another 3 days, starting from Sunday local time. Turning now to rising U.S.-China tensions, NTD's Carrie Dunst dives into the latest developments with Grant Newsham, senior fellow at the Center for Security Policy and author of When China Attacks.
While I have you, I do want to move on to the Indo-Pacific, where all of China's neighbors have been feeling their aggressions in the naval waters. Now China has reopened a one-time Japanese airfield back from World War II on the remote island of Micronesia. So what's happening here?
Well, what's happening is the Chinese will go to the far ends of the earth and do some work. And what they're doing is refurbishing an old World War II era airstrip on an island called Wolei, and it's about 300 miles or so south of Guam. So that's well within range. And they've sent a commercial outfit in to fix it up. Ironically, on an island not all that far away, the Americans are spending about $400 million to refurbish another airbase that they're going to use for military purposes. So while the U.S. military is paying some attention to the region finally, at the same time, you see the Chinese in there actually doing other things that actually make the lives of people better. And it seems to have gone under the radar. There's no reason that, say, an American Marines or Navy Seabees couldn't come in and done this airfield. Instead, the Chinese have slipped in. And they also have provided the boats to actually bring the hardware in. They provide the one main boat that the Micronesians use for serious inter-island transports, provided by China. This is what comes of America taking its eye off the ball and really ignoring the middle of the Pacific. So that's very effective political warfare by the Chinese, and we have no one to blame but ourselves for letting them, creating a vacuum. The Chinese have filled it. It's not too late, but the Chinese are active throughout the region doing similar things. And what are we doing? Well, it's a very short list of things.
Grant, the Chinese might say it's a private company. It's not our military resurfacing this airbase, refurbishing it. What do you say to that?
Well, there's an academic distinction to be made between a private Chinese company and the Chinese state, but that's all academic. In the real world, any Chinese company is an arm, an extension of the Chinese state. The Chinese have something called a national intelligence law they passed a few years ago, and it requires every Chinese everywhere to cooperate with China, with the Chinese government, with the intelligence services. Additionally, if you're going to go out and conduct a project like this, well, where does the approval to use the foreign exchange to get the other resources come from? From the Chinese state. There is no distinction to be made. China looks at it as all the same thing. We're the ones who tie ourselves into knots, imagining that there's some companies that aren't connected to the Chinese Communist Party and there's others that are. But this is, as I said, it is, you have to admit, effective political warfare when you get out and rebuild an airfield like this, and consider the psychological effect, the political effect of this on locals, the immediate locals, the locals in sort of the national level, Micronesia. And they say, well, the Americans didn't do anything, but the Chinese did. Well, that has an effect, and it weakens our military position, and not to mention just our political position, in a key part of the ocean. The Central Pacific that we are counting on to be able to operate freely in, should we need to conduct operations in the Western Pacific, say Taiwan, the Philippines, Japan. So this is really something that it's not leprechauns to blame. Ultimately, it's U.S. Indo-PACOM, U.S. State Department, DOD, that have, as I said, allowed a vacuum to develop. And vacuums get filled, and the Chinese are filling it.
Well, something to look out for. Hopefully, more eyes will be paying attention to that Indo-Pacific region. Appreciate your analysis, as always. Colonel Grant Newsham, thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much.
That's all for today's China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. If you have any feedback on the show or have something you'd like to see us cover, send us an email at chinainfocus@ntd.com. We'd love to hear from you. For on-the-clock original news coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thanks for watching. See you tomorrow.